Hello and welcome. Thank you for your interest in our review on back channels across cultures. For those of you who are not familiar with the concept, back channel refers to the subtle verbal, nonverbal, and paralanguage cues we use to indicate that we are listening. Back channel is also known as listener interactional behavior, listener responses, auditor responses, or listener talk. Backchannel influences the effectiveness of a conversation in terms of rapport establishment and successful information transmission. So, from the aforementioned definition of backchannel, we can see that backchannel can be verbal or nonverbal or paralinguistic, and it especially is cultural. First, English verbal backchannel examples can be mm-hmm, uh-uh, yeah, yeah. Okay, right. Interesting. Oh, I see. Sure. Nah. Is it? Do you? Have you? Did you? Etc. In Vietnamese, verbal backchannel can be uh, yeah, but it, or not with and The Chinese examples are 是吗?真的吗? or not with Back channel can take the form of nonverbal behaviors like head nods, head shaking, facial expressions, eye behaviors, and gesture. Or it can be paralinguistic behaviors like silence, pause, sigh, and rising tone. Back channel is very cultural as to when to use and what content it may bring up. Despite its universality, backchannel behavior varies to such a remarkable extent that numerous studies have been conducted to investigate it on divergent basis and in various aspects. So far, backchannel behavior has been canvassed in the acquisition of backchannels and use of backchannel in preschool children and adolescents, the differences in backchannel behavior between genders, the differences in backchannel behavior among regional varieties of English-speaking communities, and the differences in backchannel behavior across cultures. Our review draws on the studies dealing with the last two respects of research on backchannels, evaluations of the contributions and limitations of these studies, as well as recommendations for future research in the field are also demonstrated through the review. In the first place, let's look at the comparative research body of backchannel across English-speaking communities. These studies focus on exploring the quantitative and qualitative differences or the structure and frequency of backchannel use between varieties or dialects of English. The participants of such studies are those who speak English as a first or national language. The data mainly comprises videotaped or recorded authentic dialogues of two persons or is taken from a particular corpus. Such data is analyzed quantitatively to identify the frequency of backchannel use or qualitatively using conversational analysis to examine the distribution, function, and contextuality of backchannel use. It is found in those studies that the speakers of different English varieties and dialects share similar repertoire of backchannel, but differ in the frequency of use, the functions of backchannels, and habitual structures. For example, regarding backchannel structures, Wang and Peters in their research in 2007 managed to identify three different structures of vocalized backchannel in English, namely single vocalized backchannels, clustered vocalized backchannels, and backchannel anchors. The studies on backchannel across English varieties and dialects vary in their consideration of discourse variables. Therefore, the researchers also come up with divergent taxonomies of backchannel. For example, based on supportiveness and effective meaning of the listener responses, Stoop in 1998 classifies backchannel into cooperative overlaps, neutral minimal responses, and suppositive minimal responses. Meanwhile, Wong and Peters in 2007 divide backchannel into simultaneous, non-interruptive backchannel, interruption, and others based on the function of the backchannel used. Another research body investigates the use of backchannel by English native speakers versus non-native speakers. These comparative studies focus on the different frequency types and function between the backchannel of other languages and that in English, and the interference of English backchannel style on bilinguals' backchannel usage. The participants consist of native and non-native speakers of English who converse with each other in simulated dyads. The research methods mostly resemble the research body on backchannel across English varieties. These studies discover that non-native speakers of English acquire similar backchannel repertoire to their native counterparts when talking in English with either their in-groups or out-groups. Moreover, there is a strong positive relation between frequency of backchannel use and successful information exchange in intra-group conversations, while the opposite happens in inter-group conversations. In intercultural conversations in English, nonverbal backchannel actually is a misleading indicator of targeted messages. For example, the listener wants to denote that I am listening by nodding, but the speaker thinks it means I understand. In some studies of this domain, it is found that non-native English speakers whose English became dominant in communication use backchannel highly frequently to express their support of the current speaker's turn. However, lower frequency of English backchannel is found among those non-natives whose mother tongue is dominant. Although their frequency of backchannel use is higher than their monolingual L1 counterparts, these non-native listeners are expected to backchannel more. The last research body in our review consists of those that deal with other languages than English, such as German, Finnish, Mandarin Chinese, Japanese, and so on, but ultimately compare their backchannel use with that in English. It is documented that backchannel in those languages not only indicates support of the speaker's turns, but also shows understanding, information, and agreement. Interestingly, some studies show that native English speakers prefer conversations with people from such linguistic backgrounds with high frequency of backchannel as Japanese, and they also adjust themselves when talking with people whose English is not as competent. In conclusion, the review studies have contributed to assert the role and property of backchannels. Backchannel behavior is not solely a discourse variable. It carries and reflects both sociocultural and linguistic characteristics of a particular community. Speakers from different language backgrounds may share the same repertoire of backchannels. However, they produce such listener feedback with very different frequency and types, in different manners and contexts. The interpretation of listeners' attitude and intention varies accordingly across cultures and even within the same community, which comprises regional and dialectal varieties. Backchannels thus not only function as a supportive device in interactional discourse, but it can be the reason for misunderstanding, stereotyping, and conversation breakdown. In the process of second and foreign language acquisition, bilingual speakers also take up typical backchannel behavior of the target language at various degrees. On the one hand, the reviewed literature to a certain extent plays as a reference for better intercultural communication. On the other hand, there are limitations of those studies. Firstly, the participants' socio-cultural characteristics are underestimated or even neglected. The reviewed studies virtually overlook the role of the individual identity, the power relation between the interlocutors, or the conversational episode of the dialogues. Furthermore, most studies employ the quantitative approach and conversational analysis, which do not seem enough to holistically interpret the listener's intents. This, in turn, partly perpetuates stereotypes of certain groups who are judged as interruptive, unresponsive, or hard to talk to. Having considered the strengths and limitations of the reviewed articles, our recommendations for future studies in the field are as follow. First, in terms of methodology, qualitative analysis needs to be conducted more adequately to supplement quantitative outcomes as well as justify phenomena which cannot be statistically measured. Second, due to the socio-linguistic complexity of backchannel, it is advisable for researchers to identify discourse variables comporting with their research scope. For example, verbal or nonverbal, supportive or negative. Attached to such discourse variables are the consideration of discourse genre, for example, dyadic or three plus party conversation, same gendered or mixed, institutional or casual, spontaneous or simulated, telephone or face to face. And discourse themes, for example, giving opinion or description or narrative. Additionally, since participants' social and demographic characteristics play an influential part in their backchannel behavior, more qualitative studies should be implemented, taking participants' differences not only in gender and age, but also in social status, cultural, and individual identification into the close consideration. Finally, as to research direction, as English is becoming more and more popular, the influence of English backchannel style on bilingual conversation in English has been studied widely. However, there has not been research on whether backchannel behavior of native English-speaking people who are proficient in another language is affected by the conversational culture of that particular language. More research is needed to ascertain whether it is always a one-way effect, that bilinguals have the tendency of producing more backchannels when the target language becomes the dominant language in their daily routine. Thank you for your attention.